people. Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ava Santina,
Hi.
how the fuck are you?
Well, getting on. How about you?
Yes. Good.
I was telling you about my spider bite just before we started this.
Yes.
Do you think that's something they'd enjoy?
It absolutely would be, yeah.
All right, so I got bitten.
Oh, you're showing it off?
Yeah, I'm showing it. Which means I got bitten by a spider on my face. Which means at some point when I was asleep, there was a spider on my face.
Your second spider bite in as many weeks?
Yes. So I think what the problem is that where my flat is, there's like a courtyard out the back, which is like my garden area situation, yeah?
Yep.
And it's concrete, so it's very damp and very wet, and that's sort of like what spiders like.
Yep.
And so I think they're kind of,
They're coming in from there.
Yeah. And I'm trying to be really holistic and just try to naturally keep them out by like saying things like, please, can you not come in here? And they're not listening. And I have put down lavender. Well, that works for scorpions, doesn't it? Yeah.
That's it.
My nonna, she puts lavender so that maybe it's an Italian thing. So that the scorpions don't come in.
I've got to be honest with you, I can't even begin to possibly shoot this down because I just don't know.
Yeah.
For me, it seems far-fetched.
Well, it's not working, so
That's the
clearly.
truth. Well, I guess if one arachnid is dispelled by the lavender, then perhaps it works for another. But yeah, we don't have scorpions in the UK.
No, but I think she likes to keep up the older.
Are there scorpions in Italy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, in southern Italy for sure.
Really?
I mean, think about. I'm talking about Napoli. It's hot there. There are scorpions.
Cool.
And not a good bin collection service. They're not connected.
What's that got to do with anything?
Well, it's mafia run, isn't it?
Yes.
Sorry, let me just keep stating the obvious.
What was I going to say? You can call me Il Padrino.
Yeah?
Guess who got made a godfather this weekend?
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
I am now...
I'm so glad that was the context of that.
I've started an organised criminal racket. No. I am now would you say responsible? Connected?
Yeah, I mean, if God forbid you're now, they pass away, that child is yours.
Well, then I am custodian in waiting of a delightful 3-week-old.
3-week-old?
Girl.
I was going to say 3 years old. They really are.
Late, yeah.
They were biding their time with that.
Maybe someone dropped out.
Yeah.
No, it's 3 weeks. So, there's a little mafia connection for you.
Who are they? Friends? Family?
Friends, dear friends. So.
And how did you feel when you got the honour?
Well, yeah, honoured.
Did you go to a christening?
No, but that's the interesting thing, right? Because I got christened. I'm not religious, and as a result, I have godparents.
And as a result, you won't go to hell.
Crucially.
That's what's important.
And believe me, there's a lot in the pro column for that happening.
Yeah. It's good to just cover your bases, I think, with things like that.
But now, because I'm actually probably agnostic rather than I am an atheist, but I don't intend to christen my offspring. But I would like them to have godparents. One, because it's like an extra present on birthdays. And two, it's also, an extra layer, isn't it? It's an extra layer of guardianship that's available.
But it also gives you an in with the child, right? So when that child's a bit older, they're like, this is my godfather. This is not just some man who comes to my parents' house. You know what I'm saying?
Hang out, yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure. You have more of I guess you forge more of a relationship. But I don't know. It's not legally binding, is it?
I don't know, actually.
I can't imagine it is.
I mean, but, what higher power do we serve than the papal?
Exactly, yeah. But I don't know. Let's say the worst was to happen. Could you imagine saying to like the grandparents of the child, no,
yeah,
I will look after her because I am the godfather. They'd be like, fuck off.
Yeah, but they might prefer the child to be with you because you've got the farm.
Yeah, naturally. Yeah,
that's a nice place for a child to grow up.
Naturally, yeah, the Sydenham farm. Yeah, huge.
Sydenham farm.
How are you otherwise? Anything else you wanna discuss before we get into the meat of this?
Well, we are going to get into the meat of it, aren't we? I think maybe we should just
go straight to it. Okay, well, in which case we will talk about the pro-Israel and pro-Palestine protests that happened this weekend. And thanks to the magic of editing, when I finish this sentence, we will be joined by PoliticsJOE's producer, Laura Beveridge, who was at one of the marches this weekend. Producer Laura, hello.
Hello, thank you for having me.
She's stolen the line. Yes, very good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for accepting the invite.
The rage in your eyes.
Not someone else doing it as well.
He like twinged like that.
Thank you for accepting the invite to come this side of the camera lens and making your on-screen debut, Laura. We're going to have to, there'll be a name strap nickname.
Producer Laura, I don't know. The other Scottish one.
Not bad. Not bad. It's a bit descriptive. We'll figure it out. Dare I invite the audience to...
Not Alistair Campbell's daughter.
the anti-Napo baby. Okay, guys. So 2 protests this weekend in London. First of all, a repeat mass demonstration in favour of Palestine on Saturday. And then on Sunday, also a pro-Israeli demonstration. Laura, you were at the march on Sunday. We'll talk. I think we'll just take them in chronological order before we start drawing on your experiences at that march. So let's deal with Saturday and the sort of the Met Police said it was about 100,000 people.
Mm-hmm. It was big.
They were reckoned out marching. It's caused quite a commotion to be honest with you in the British media about these marches, and somewhat ironically, the people most enraged and bothered by this march, generally speaking, could probably be categorised into the free speech brigade, who normally are pretty much like our fundamental freedoms and rights of free speech is being eroded. They haven't extended, broadly speaking, that right to these demonstrations. Ava, give us a little bit of a summary of the kind of reaction and political feeling around this demonstration that happened on Saturday.
Let's just understand what it was. So I did pop down. But yeah, there was about 100,000 people who were on a pro-Palestine march. And then there was an adjacent march that was a Hizb ut-Tahrir march. And it's more of a fundamentalist group. They were marching adjacent rather than alongside the pro-Palestinian march, right? That's really important to understanding what I'm going to say next, which is there were some people who were on that march who have allegedly committed acts that are, the Met Police deemed not decent. So they were shouting jihad, they were shouting pro-Hamas rhetoric, and some of them allegedly had signs that were in support of Hamas. And those images and a couple of videos from that subsect of the march, 10 people were arrested, right, out of 100,000 people who went. Those people have become the focal point for the entire march. So this morning, all day yesterday and this morning, there were a lot of commentators, quote unquote, who have been lamenting multiculturalism. A dog whistle, essentially, to say that this is the root cause of anti-Semitism is that march. Unfairly, I would argue, because that is a subsect of that march. A very peaceful march, all in all. There was also an incident on the tube. There was a TfL driver who, from the video, it appears that there was someone over the tannoy shouting free, free, and the carriage would respond Palestine. What happened was a lot of people had got on the tube to go to the march. Everyone's got their banners, their flags. It was quite obvious where they were going. The tube driver said something on the lines of, I couldn't get today off work, but have a good day today and stay safe, free, free. And then everyone chanted back Palestine. People now want him sacked and worse, arrested. So that's been the nature of the discourse off of the back of that march.
There's a lot there that I want to interrogate, not least the point about multiculturalism. And I guess the TfL thing for me seems quite simple in that it would appear to be an issue for the TfL and not an issue for the police.
It probably wasn't advisable.
100%.
On a 2,000 person carriage to start a chant like that.
I assume it's in TfL's terms and conditions that you're probably not allowed to make political pronouncements over the tannoy system. I feel like that's probably a given.
Yeah.
That feels pretty like day one at train driver school. I don't know. But equally, I think it's an internal matter.
Football, that would completely break my point, because I would say this is not you shouldn't be footballifying. There should be no footballification of this discussion. However, it has been quite loose and fast about what train drivers can shout over the tannoy and what certain train staff shout when they're on the platform. So if it's not clear in the rules, I don't see why the guy should lose his job over it.
Yeah. Well, he certainly shouldn't be arrested, I don't think.
No.
And we'll come back to multiculturalism, but let's talk about this. Let's talk about the kind of the more extreme elements of that march on Saturday, because this is the way with every kind of demo, right? We've all seen it at every single one we've been to. There are always fringe elements there that are far more extreme than, let's say, Jeff, who's at the demo just because he sort of vaguely wants to express his solidarity with the Palestinian people. If as some people are suggesting, that the entire demo was like a hotbed of Islamist fundamentalism, do we really think that 100,000 people would be openly marching through central London calling for jihad?
Yeah.
No, we don't. We clearly don't think that. A separate point, literally on the phrase jihad, it means different things to different people. So your westernized understanding of that is essentially holy war, right? It's the you're probably thinking of sort of like either recent conflicts in the Middle East. You're maybe thinking about the Crusades, and your kind of and your interpretation of that is literal physical violence. There are, and I'm almost certainly going to bastardize this, so I apologize to people in advance. But there are steps to jihad, and within sort of non-extreme interpretations of Islam, jihad does not mean starting to fight people. It's sort of it's a challenge and a conflict with sin, and it's about personal development. You sort of improving yourself in a spiritual way, and I think that's a subtlety and a nuance that should be pointed out. And I'm not saying, by the way, that whoever shouted this was doing that. I don't know the full context of it, but I just think that's an important nuance that we should point out to people nonetheless. Laura, there were some extreme elements there, right? There was a guy with the Shahada flying that. There were some. I saw a photo of someone who just had a paper cardboard sign, and it literally just said, "I fully support Hamas." So that person has no get out. Unfortunately for them, they've kind of made their own bed. They're going to have to lie in that one. But for people who are saying that because of these fringe elements, because of this sort of smaller group of people who are doing this, they no longer feel safe, or that perhaps there's a problem in British society that needs to be addressed. Do you think that argument is credible?
I think first of all, it's important to say that the guy that flew the Shahada flag was arrested on suspicion of inciting racial hatred by the police. So it's definitely not condoned. It was taken very seriously, and he was arrested. But I think that doesn't matter it doesn't matter to the people that were at the rally, the pro-Israel rally on Sunday, because there was a very tangible sense of fear. And a lot of that was to do with the 100,000 people that took to the street in support of Palestine. There was one attendee I spoke to who said that London let 100,000 Hamas protesters march in the streets of the city, which is quite unfair. As we've just spoken about, they weren't 100,000 Hamas protesters. But he later did qualify, in the next part of our conversation, that he's there to liberate Gaza from Hamas. Palestinians deserve much more than Hamas. Hamas is keeping hostage not just the 200 Israelis, but more than 2 million Palestinian civilians.
That's a really interesting point, because what you're pointing to there, and I think this has been evident over the last few months in the reaction to the horror, the atrocity that happened on October 7th, that when Hamas made this incursion into Israel, and again the atrocities that have been happening since with the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. The fact, the truth, the objective reality, I think has largely been lost, and it's one of the reasons actually why we've been sort of reluctant or slightly more. Slightly less gung-ho about covering this than we have about other topics, right? It's because actually, regardless of what you say, regardless of sort of the objective reality of what you're reporting or anything like that, people have already largely made up their minds about this conflict. They've made up their minds about which side they support, and they've made up their minds about which side they don't. And so you end up in a situation, and I don't want to. I'm not trying to sort of lessen the validity of the feeling of that person at the pro-Israel March. But clearly 100,000 pro-Hamas people were not walking through central London on Saturday. Nonetheless, that person feels like that's what that was. And I think both sides of this argument have not only dehumanized each other to such an extent that you'll end up saying, that the deaths of more than 200 people at that music festival are regrettable, but unfortunately, a necessary part of resistance against the colonial power, or the people who say, that Gaza should be turned into a car park and that the people that live there are human animals. They have clearly dehumanized each other to such an extent that they feel like those things are valid to say, but they also are incredibly reductive about their opponents. So if you support Palestine, you support Hamas is the logic of what that individual said there, right? And similarly, people have been offering very uncharitable views to Jewish people who may well be grieving, mourning the attacks that they experience, but equally aren't particularly supportive or indeed hostile and aggressive towards the Netanyahu government and the drift to the right that Israel is experiencing. I feel like there is just a complete lack of any form of nuance in this discussion, and that's actually that quote there. You've kind of used a pretty neat example.
Oh, yeah, I would 100% agree. I think something that was very obvious at the rally was that there was a conflation of Judaism, the Jewish diaspora, with the Israeli state, but also with the Netanyahu government in particular, which is interesting considering especially how before October 7th, there was quite big upset in Israel over Netanyahu's plans to allow the government to overturn the Supreme Court. So he wasn't a popular figure, and I don't think it's fair to conflate all these different groups. But that was definitely something that was happening, not least by Michael Gove, who spoke at the rally and said that the IDF embody the Jewish spirit, which I thought it was quite strange to suggest, or to kind of make an army a religious force.
In the nation of Israel, people can live freely and love freely. Israel is the only nation in the Middle East where you can have a pride march. And we see an Israeli pride flag over there. When I see that flag, I feel pride. I feel pride in Israel's tradition of inclusivity, humanity, and democracy. And Israel also now has citizen soldiers, the IDF, who are there to defend Israel and the Jewish people. And we heard earlier from one of our speakers the difference between the IDF and Hamas. The IDF are there to protect civilians. Hamas exist to slaughter civilians. The IDF embody the Jewish spirit. Hamas want to kill every Jewish citizen of Israel. They must not win. They will not win. We stand with Israel now and forever.
It's doubly provocative, those remarks, isn't it? Because depending on your interpretation, the most generous interpretation of those remarks is that he views the IDF as a defensive force and that the spirit of Judaism, is one of defense. That's probably the most generous one. The more ugly interpretation of it, which I don't think he meant, but it's certainly one way of interpreting it, is that essentially, the actions of the IDF in Gaza at the moment are sort of descendant from the tenets of Judaism, which for me, I don't think that. I think you'd struggle to suggest that those two things are interconnected. I don't know about you, but watching the videos that you got from the march, I found it. This is a bit of a tangent, but the sort of the style of oratory that Michael Gove employs, and I think everyone in Westminster, generally the view, right, is that Michael Gove is a good speaker, is one of, I don't know, when there's been iconic moments in the House of Commons, traditionally the sort of senior Tories have often put Gove up to deliver the speech, crunch Brexit votes, the key moments. He's often the one that speaks. And watching him address the crowd, I thought was I thought it was really telling, to be honest with you. Even just the contrast between him and Jonathan Reynolds in their delivery, and watching who by all accounts and all commentators and politicians think is sort of possibly the Conservatives' most gifted speaker, actually really struggle to kind of deliver an impactful stump speech. That was certainly my interpretation anyway. I wasn't there. I don't know if it felt the same in the crowd.
I think it's interesting to hear you say that, like just having listened to it, because in the crowd, I felt like what he was saying was going down quite well, and it definitely went down better than what Jonathan Reynolds said. And obviously that's just from me standing in the crowd, listening to people around me, and can't speak for everyone there. But Michael, as you said, Michael Gove was very Britain stands with Israel. Jonathan Reynolds took a slightly different angle, which was the condemnation of all terrorism and standing united against terrorism, which I think is a little less of a strong approach than Michael Gove was taking.
The condemnation of terror, there cannot be any equivocation, any caveats, any ifs or buts. It must simply be the condemnation of terror and the simple message that we must bring them home.
Bring them home! Bring them home!
Do you think as well that perhaps, if that's the sort of objective reality of being on the ground, that perhaps it's my political biases showing there a little bit, and that perhaps in the same way that I thought Gove wasn't that hot a speaker, the way that the crowd reacted to him would perhaps be indicative of their political biases, and that perhaps they were more receptive to him as a Conservative figure than necessarily Jonathan Reynolds as a Labour figure?
Maybe. I don't want to say the reaction to Jonathan Reynolds was cold, because it definitely wasn't. It just wasn't as warm as the reaction to Michael Gove, I felt. I think there was, generally speaking to people in the crowds, listening to the speakers, there seemed to be a lot of appreciation for Rishi Sunak and the British government, and the way that the British government have responded and been so strong in their support of Israel and Israel's right to defend itself. Like, that came across very strongly, that the people in the crowd were very appreciative of that. Saying that, I found it interesting that I heard, going back to what we were talking about with the rally on Saturday, people didn't feel safe. And just to bring it back to that, like, even though the government is being so clear that we are on the side of, or not side, but like, that we support Israel, Britain stands with Israel, that people still didn't feel safe in London.
Well,
I mean, there's a very serious conversation to be had about some of the things that went on, the minor, like, please take my words with nuance, but some things that were done at that pro-Palestine rally were disgusting. And if you were a British Jewish person, you would look at that and go, I don't feel safe here. And that is I think this is the thing, right? So Suella Braverman, yesterday, it was announced she would be meeting with Sir Mark Rowley today to talk about the language that was used and why didn't the Met Police take a firmer hand with it, right? But I look at that, and I guess because you've seen so many dog whistles from Braverman over the past few weeks, you sort of go like, do you even really care? Or do you just, is this because you're anti what was ever at that march, rather than actually caring for the people who might have been affected by what was said? And maybe that's just me being cynical, but I don't really know how much you do care. I mean, £3 million went to protecting Jewish synagogues, schools. Is that enough? I know people who aren't sending their kids to school still.
So I didn't mean to suggest there that that the fear wasn't legitimate. Sorry if that came across.
No, not at all.
No,
not at all. No, and I think actually that, whilst we're talking about, I think probably because we're talking about these two protests in comparison, we're sort of, perhaps our view is sort of slightly sort of focused on that. But there has been, a more than 1,000% increase in hate crimes against Jewish people recorded by the Metropolitan Police, right, since this has started. So it's not that they're kind of going, oh God, those scary protesters. It's like, no, there are hate crimes being committed against Jewish people now as a result of it. And so, I totally agree with you. Their fears are legitimate. And to be honest with you, even if those hate crimes weren't happening, who are you to say to someone, your fear is not legitimate? Do you know what I mean? Like, if they tell you they're scared, you believe them and you accept that they're scared. Do you know what I mean? It's whether or not you think that the reason they're scared is, logical or follows, it's sort of irrelevant, isn't it? Because if that's how someone feels, that's how they feel, and it's something that has to be addressed.
Well, I mean, the point of it as well is that a big portion of the group that was organised was, the anti-racists, right? So a lot of these people who go on these marches are because they are anti-racism, and being anti-Semitic would fall under that bracket. So if you are one of the few people who really think that for something going on in Gaza, you now have a right to attack a Jewish person in London, you're out of your head. Like, you need to go to prison. Yeah. Outrageous. Yeah,
completely. To your point about kind of the political manoeuvring of Suella Braverman here, I think it's I think you can say it is that, because as Laura quite rightly said, the police have arrested people. The police are looking. The reason I told you about that sign that said "I fully support Hamas." The reason I've seen that is because the Met have tweeted it and said, "Who was holding this sign? We want to speak to them." Why? Because they're going to get fucking nicked, obviously, right? It feels to me like posturing, and it feels to me. If we talk about this particularly in the context of multiculturalism, right? Let's go back to what you were saying earlier. Has the refrain that's coming out that multiculturalism has failed, essentially, because of seeing this protest, and that for me really gives away the prejudices of the people that are saying that, right? Because they're not tweeting about the pro-Israeli march and saying multiculturalism has failed. They're tweeting the march that is predominantly attended by Muslims and people of color, and they're saying it about that march because what are we saying here? People of different ethnic backgrounds form up multicultural Britain. That includes Jews. That includes Muslims. It includes black people. If you're only saying that the pro-Palestinian march is evidence that multiculturalism has failed us, you're literally just outing yourself, being like, there are too many Muslims in the street. It's like it's. I don't even know if I want to engage with it further than that. It's just embarrassing.
I know, but I think you do need to engage with it, because the point is that if you're watching a rolling news station, right, and you're watching coverage of that, and that's the sort of commentary that you're listening to, and you're only hearing that, and you're not hearing, any kind of rebuttal to it, you'll go, oh my God, yeah, the Muslims want to kill us. That's what they want to do. You're riling people up. Yeah. These sort of dog whistles are setting a really dangerous precedent, and it's making people fearful.
I think it's completely irresponsible.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's completely irresponsible, and I think it ties into the media narratives around this, to be honest with you. Whether
Framing
it's
tensions like that is nuts.
Yeah, whether it's kind of the reporting of unverified claims by, for example, the IDF, whether it's the sort of the mindless repetition of Israel has a right to defend itself, but they're not challenging the politicians that are saying that on your radio station when the thing that you're asking them about is collective punishment and a war crime, allowing a politician to endlessly repeat Israel has a right to defend itself without challenging and saying, does that include the war crimes that are currently taking place? It all fits into this broader media environment of demonizing, stigmatizing the Palestinians, and not treating the sort of the humanitarian crisis that's happening there with the same level of sympathy and empathy that we saw for the atrocities that happened in Israel. And I despair, to be quite honest with you. The whole thing, maybe to take the conversation away from the editorial justification we've given previously for like our approach to covering this. I think there's honestly, there's a personal element of this in me, which is that I feel fucking sick talking about a lot of this. Like it genuinely upsets me. And I don't know if there's much more I can say about that, to be honest with you.
For me, we're not there. I mean, that's the discussion that we've been having a lot of the time, isn't it? That we're not there. You cover this side of it. When we can go to the Rafah crossing, that is a conversation we'll be having.
We'll be sending you there, will we? Straight there, straight to the Rafah crossing.
I'm glad that we've done it on here now, because I was going to broach this conversation with you later.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that we've done it now and we've put it on record. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, when that news broke a couple of weeks ago, yeah, I mean, I think most of us can say you're probably once removed from someone who was, adjacent to the festival or was around the festival or knew someone who was there, and, that's what you're talking about in your private circles. And it's very difficult to be an objective, to be objective when something like that is so personal. Mm-hmm. I really I think there's a time and a place where you sit back and you understand it's not your turn to speak. And I think that's what I really felt those 2 weeks, like the week, because we've been talking about it quite a lot. We've been everywhere talking about it, not just on here, on various stations. Both you and I have. But certainly at the beginning, when you're not there, I don't have connections in Gaza that I can text and talk to and get on the ground information. I'm just regurgitating what I've seen online, which is what enough people were already doing and spreading
misinformation.
Yes, smorgasbord of misinformation,
Delicious smorgasbord.
But you know what I mean? And it's like, is that helpful?
Yeah. Let's dip this misinformation into this raclette. Yum, yum, yum.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's a really good point. And I perhaps cheapened it by making a joke, so I'm sorry.
Don't worry about it. There's also a difference between being an activist and a journalist, right? And I think that when people listen to I like to think that when people listen to us, it's because we know enough about it that we feel confident to talk to other people and explain the story to them. Without being in the region, I didn't feel like that was something I could do.
Speaking of people in the region, Laura, you interviewed a couple of people who escaped from Israel, left, either coming to the UK or others who've gone elsewhere. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about the conversations you had while you were there?
Yeah, so I spoke to 2 women who were in the crowds at the rally who had both managed to escape Israel on chartered flights. They stayed in the Gaza envelope, so the areas that were attacked by Hamas. And just, I think the speakers who spoke on stage who had families who were either taken hostage by Hamas or murdered by Hamas, and these 2 women that I spoke to, their stories were so powerful. Their grief was incredibly raw. And I think the fact that they could even stand and speak eloquently about what had happened to them and their family was just, it was quite powerful. And I'm super grateful that these 2 women spoke to me and shared their story with me. So the first woman was called Efrat, and she is Israeli, and she, in fact, why don't we play the clip rather than me explaining it?
Roll the clip.
I'm Israeli and my husband is Australian. It's a very unique circumstances for me because it's the first time I felt like a refugee myself. I felt on one hand very, very scared. On the other hand, very lucky that I can actually take a break from the war, especially when I have a young child. And we did it especially for her. If I didn't have a young child, I would still be in Israel. But just to give us some sort of sense of peace and not going to the bomb shelter every 5 minutes, it was very important for us. So I felt sad, I felt lucky. But I must say, I still feel a bit unsafe, even being in London. Because as it always feels like the people who are more into the division and the hate, we are outnumbered, and there's more emphasis towards the hate and discriminating and going against Israel and its actions. So I'm still feeling unsafe, I must say. I'm even hosting a mom and her daughter in my apartment at the moment. They needed a shelter because not every house in Israel has a shelter. So we have a shelter, so we have a mom and daughter staying at our apartment so they can have an easy access to a shelter when there is a siren. So I think it's light. You can see the light in this very, very dark moment.
What was your feeling coming away from speaking to Efrat? How did you feel after you chatted to her?
Just like I said, I'm quite amazed that they could speak so strongly and coherently after what happened to them, and the fact that her house in Israel is still being used as a bomb shelter by another mother and child. And again, I think it's sad that even though she's in London, she's still feeling unsafe. Yeah, and the other woman I spoke to was called Sigal, and she's 56, and she has a story of also escaping Israel, if we should play that one as well.
Absolutely.
We didn't know yet that the terrorists have entered Israel. Then we started to hear guns shooting, and we have a community WhatsApp of our moshav, and then we got the message to stay in the shelter because of the terrorists got inside. We stayed in the shelter for 7 hours, frightened the hell. We didn't have a gun, we didn't have a pistol, we didn't have anything. We only had a kitchen knife to protect us because we knew that the door of the shelter will not be closed enough. The terrorists can open the door. Sunday morning, we've been told we have to leave the place. 2 o'clock, they took us out with the army, the people from the Moshav and Absor. We went through the fields, not from the main way, through the fields, like in the Holocaust, when we were running out from the Germans.
Pretty harrowing listening to that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's tough, really tough. Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add than that. Do you guys have anything else you'd like to say? We happy?
I'm not happy, but you know.
No, obviously not happy. We'll try and get along to. I'm so bored of having to caveat everything I say about this. We are, but to both sides, we will try and get ourselves along to one of the Palestinian demos to be able to provide that perspective as well. But you've got to go somewhere first. Laura, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being there on Sunday, and thank you for all of the brilliant work you do on helping us get this podcast out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ava, fantastic to have Laura with us on the Pubcast, usually behind the camera, making her debut. Glad to have her with us. She's disappeared again now, thanks to the magic of editing. Let's talk about the Renters Reform Bill.
Let's.
So could you give us just a sort of précis, over-the-top view, what's happening in Parliament today and what's it got to do with people who live in rented accommodation?
Well, it's back for another reading. So this was going through the last time that Parliament was in session. It was paused. So the bill is Michael Gove's brainchild, and it's supposed to give renters extra powers, or not extra powers, some kind of security when they are renting off of their landlord. This obviously ran into contention immediately because there are a lot of Tory MPs who are landlords, and they also represent constituencies where there are a lot of landlords. And the landlord lobbying game is strong. So this bill has been watered down. Today there are rumours. I mean, by the time that this goes out, it won't be till the evening. So by tomorrow, we might have found out if any of these have come to fruition. But the no-fault evictions, which was kind of the proper cornerstone of the bill, and would be really beneficial to tenants, might be scrapped. There's also discussion about pets. So in the bill, firstly, they were going to allow pets you couldn't ban pets from rented accommodation. That might be watered down now as well, that it will basically be a bit of advice to the landlord that's like, if they're quite attached to it, can you just let them have it? And other such bits like that.
It's interesting, isn't it, that there's this piece of legislation, in theory, should go some way to redressing the power imbalance that exists, right, between the renter and the landlord. To suggest, I know one of the favourite sort of arguments that you see when Ed goes outside the sort of the landlord convention and like doorsteps them and says, talks to them about the nature of their business and their work, is they like to say that they're providing like a fundamental service, a societal good by providing people with clean housing, and that actually they're fairly put out by the process of having to provide the housing. And what they mean specifically by that is good quality housing that conforms to fire safety regulations, that doesn't have mold, damp, that has working appliances, etc. Now, that is obviously it's certainly a interpretation of the relationship between the landlord and the tenant. As someone who has direct experience of renting in London and also in Cardiff, I can tell you that's not my experience of it. It's not anyone I know's experience of it. And I wouldn't want to speak for you, but as far as I understand it, it's also not your experience of renting in London. That you are not some sort of almighty, powerful tenant with the power to sort of, fuck with your landlord and demand, expensive pieces of furniture or, the latest dishwasher or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, you're kind of at the whim of the landlord. They can evict you should they desire to. Oftentimes as well, my friends in the past, and I actually have direct experience of this as well, is you suggest let's say, the fire alarm's broken. It keeps going off in the middle of the night. Can you come round and fix the fire alarm? And they begrudgingly do so after probably some fairly passive-aggressive emails backwards and forwards. And then 2 months later, what's happened? Oh no, you're being evicted. What do the two things have anything to do with each other? No, absolutely not. No, they have nothing to do with each other. Nothing to do with each other at all. It just so happens I don't want you to live here anymore. And they have the power to do that because the power imbalance is completely tilted in their favour, not least because they have the assets, they have the wealth, they have the money. The legislation also supports them. But secondly as well, because the rental market is so hot, they can just get rid of you and there will be someone else who will happily accept the poor conditions, the low quality housing, because they're so desperate for somewhere to live. Someone will tolerate, your threshold for tolerance is higher than the next person that comes along who, maybe has been sofa surfing for 10 days and is absolutely desperate for somewhere to live.
Mm-hmm. The narrative on landlords has really changed as well, dramatically in the last, 30 years. And that's because we don't have any social housing anymore. And so the private rental market is pretty much the only place that people can turn to, no matter what pay you're on. I mean, 30 years ago...
A lot of the time it is the old social housing, the old council housing.
Of course it is, yeah.
That they're now privately renting out to you.
Yeah, right to buy on it, and now they're renting it out. I mean, I know stories from my family down in Bermondsey where, a landlord would be very unpopular in that area. Very. And now there's some kind of deity. They're writing parliamentary legislation. I really have zero time. It's like probably the one thing that I will always be completely partial on. I have no time for you bringing in an income off of my income. Yeah. Sorry.
I think, on that argument for me, I think it's landlordism. It's the redistribution of income, but in completely the wrong direction, if that makes sense. It is the transfer of wealth from the wage class to the asset class. It is the people who own housing, extracting a rent. I mean, obviously, we all know this is called rent, from people who can't. And because of the way that the property market in Britain functions, that also serves to deny those people in the wage class access to owning the thing that the landlord has. So you're entrenching inequality, and you're also redistributing income away from people who actually it should be working in the opposite direction. Do I think that some landlordism, to some extent, is necessary in a functioning society? Yes, I do. Do I think that they should be able to charge exorbitant rents? Do I think that they should be able to provide low quality housing? Do I think that they should be able to kick their tenants out without giving any justification for doing so? No, I don't. I think if you look at those three things, you say, if you're to interpret the relationship between a landlord and a tenant as a conflict, there is only one interpretation, and it is that the landlords are fucking the tenants and have been for years. I think in tandem with a healthy amount of council housing and affordable homes for people who want to buy and own them outright, there's space to have a private rented sector. The way that the private rented sector has expanded, grown, and now dominates, particularly when I say dominates, I mean particularly amongst the younger generation, young professionals, either in urban centres or actually just sort of younger people elsewhere in the country who can't afford to own their own home. It's not right that the ratio, the composite mixture of those three different kinds of housing has shifted so dramatically towards private rented. And it's a multifaceted puzzle. There's all sorts of things to addressing that. But I think one of the most obvious and sort of short-term needed ones is an expansion and increased delivery of council housing.
Absolutely. I just... The one thing I would have loved to have seen in this bill that we're not going to see, and it's way too ambitious, I think, even for a Labour government to put in, is preventing buy-to-lets on new builds. For me, it is absolutely blood-boiling rage thinking about how, Mayor of London, like similar schemes to the Mayor of London scheme, will provide affordable housing. Those houses will be purchased by landlords and then rented out for a ridiculous cost. It's outrageous that that's allowed to happen. I mean, I think there was a case as well in Oxfordshire just a couple of months ago where there were these two new builds that would have been perfect for, a starter family, lovely little houses. They're bought, they're already on the market, rented, like for rental. That is obscene. The government should be providing some kind of proper back to loan, not that crap ISA scheme that they've got going that actually allows people to buy somewhere to live in, rather than fueling a few people who are in a lobby that intimidate them into watering down legislation.
The help to buy ISA you mentioned there is you can get, it's something like 25%, right? There's 25% added on to what you've saved if you use it to buy a home, but I believe it has to be a new home. Like it has to be a brand new build or
a renovated home. Yeah,
there's some kind of distinction between. Yeah, you can get something else.
It has to be renovated like dramatically.
And is it up to 10 grand?
It's it means that if you're
It's very more than, isn't it?
The ISA is up to 10 grand. In the autumn statements, Hunt is thinking about increasing that, but it basically means that you can pay about 5% of your deposit. But if you're looking in London, if you are a single person and you'd like to buy, a measly little 1-bedroom just so that you can, not be in the rain, sleep somewhere, then you can buy like what, 400, it's about £400,000, isn't it, that you would need to, and the ISA doesn't quite cover that.
Saying that again.
If you're a single person.
Yeah, because you need to combine the incomes of two people, right, to get the loan value from the bank. Obviously, another way of doing that. You'd be able to do it as a single person if you had a fucking ginormous deposit, right?
Of course, yeah.
If you put down, let's say, I don't know, fucking 300 grand on that 400 grand house, you're then able to get a mortgage. The entire point that all of this misses is that who the hell is accruing £300,000 by themselves?
You could do it off, you could do it with about a £75,000 deposit. But if you earn, say, the London, average of £38,000, if you're paying £1,500 a month in rent, then you are not going to be able to save up said deposit.
The really frustrating thing for me in all of this as well is that within the hypothetical that you've just outlined, the monthly mortgage repayments that person would be expected to pay will be around roughly £1,500 a month. The person you're talking about has paid their rent on time every month for the last, take your pick, 5, 10, 15 years, right? They have a track record. The whole business of when a bank is deciding to enter into a mortgage agreement with you is they're judging A, whether they're going to be able to make any money from the transaction, and B, if you're going to reliably make your payments on time. If you have a list of payments that goes, here is me paying £1,500 every single month for the last 15 years, I don't understand why that isn't evidence enough to be able to show to a bank and say, I can maintain these mortgage payments. And if you address that problem and you allow that to serve as evidence enough, and you then go to perhaps, let's say, state intervention to provide the deposit that people need. So I don't know whether you probably have to be sliding scale. You couldn't do lump sum, obviously, but for the sake of this argument, let's just say you were to give people 50 grand, 75 grand. The government gets that money back when your house is sold, but you're now paying towards an asset. You're no longer subject to the whims of a landlord. You have improved housing security and a higher degree of dignity, pride in self, pride in place, and a firmer root in the community you live in. What's to say you can't do that? Why couldn't you do that?
Yeah, I've always spoken to many number of Tories about this, about the best option that you could give young people is if you can prove that you've paid rent every single month on time for 7 years, then you should be eligible for a government-backed 100% loan. The same way that, our parents' generation were offered 110% back mortgages. And then you get into this conversation with, okay, yeah, but then what happens if you default on the payment and then we'll have another housing crisis? And it's like, listen, all right, with this rent thing, if you miss a payment, even by a day, like, Roger, the landlord, is taking you up the small claims court. He doesn't give a crap about you. But maybe that's like laissez-faire government, right? Because what you're doing is instead of the bank taking the risk, the landlord is taking the risk. But if you're the tenant, I'm getting really angry. I'm getting really worked up. It just annoys me so much that even the idea that somehow a government-backed loan would lead to the same 2008 housing crisis that we saw back then would be in any way similar to if you offer these government-backed loans to people who've previously paid rent on time. It's not the same.
I think the riposte to that as well is, my good man, my good parliamentary representative, there is already a housing crisis. It's just that you're not at the sharp end of it. As the average age at which someone can own a home ever increases and gradually approaches 40, there is a housing crisis in this country.
Housing emergency. They're talking
just because you own like 6 of them and you rent them out as HMOs. You don't think there's a problem with that. You don't think there's a crisis.
Yeah.
When he says there could be a crisis, what he means is landlords will have to sell the houses they own, and that is for my money not the same as quite literally millions of people not being able to get onto the housing ladder.
Yeah. Liquidate the market, my friend. Do it. That argument that they talk about, when some people go, we work really hard for this home and we deserve all of the, the price that it has accrued, over the past 20 years. And it's like, listen, Sandra, you bought this house for £35,000 and now it is worth £700,000. That is an unreasonable markup.
Yeah. I think that there's possibly an argument around that, right? There's an argument around, at the moment, capital gains tax only comes in on second homes, right? And I think as a pragmatist, you look at the increase in house value, and I think there's possibly an argument to say that either an increase in stamp duty or an expansion of capital gains to accommodate for the fact that a huge amount of people have earned, in most cases, not all, but a lot of them, 6 figures, apropos of being a boomer, basically, getting a house relatively cheap, maintaining their payments, and then 40 years later, we've heated the housing market to such an extent that it goes, oh, all of a sudden you've actually just produced £600,000 out your ass for doing largely nothing. Well,
also, but from benefiting from whatever infrastructure the government has put in around you, right? So if you suddenly live in an area that now has, I don't know, a nice leisure centre or a station, things that a good school, things the government have paid for, the council, you've benefited from that, right? So why do you not have to pay anything back to say, thanks for the £500,000 bonus you've given my house? There's
also a question, that's one route of doing it. The other route, and this is also an interesting one for me, is that millennials and, what's the one underneath millennials? Gen Z?
Yeah.
Yeah, they stand to be sharpest decline in living standards from the generation before coming to them. However, because of the problem we've just outlined, i.e. these people who've become incredibly wealthy without doing a great deal of necessarily work, when they die, their inheritance goes to millennials, Gen Zers, who are, whilst being pretty relatively, and when I say relatively, I mean compared to the generations that came before them, worse off. They stand to then become the richest generation later in life once that inheritance filters through. So if we were again to be talking about trying to redress that balance, you could possibly talk about maybe some kind of expansion of inheritance tax to kind of tap into that.
But then you're going after the potentially lower middle classes rather than going after, I actually don't believe you should go after people who've just managed to buy their own home. I would like to go after the landlords. If you pass away and you've got an entire tower block of ex-social housing, yeah, that shit's not going to your kids. No way. That's going back into the community.
Yeah.
I think that, there was some talk about Hunt in the autumn statement next month doing his little stamp duty fix again. No stamp duty. To incentivize the markets, to stimulate the markets.
I'm interested to see. That'll be the last one before a general election, won't it? Depending on the timing of it, but
might have a spring budget as well. Yeah,
most likely.
I sort of love all of the when is the election chat.
Yeah,
because I don't know what this is, but for some reason I get messages off of people like honestly every other day being like, "Hey, there's a general election about to be called. Have you heard about this?" So I'm like. No. Where did you hear that from? Yeah. Who's talking about it to you?
There's like an FBPE Twitter space somewhere where someone with like a slightly too zoomed in profile picture, but nonetheless a blue tick, has sort of said, yeah, we're hearing that there's going to be a spring election, and then that filters out into the surrounding online space and starts being DM'd to people like yourself, and you go, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Where are you getting that from?
I mean, shout out to this one guy who I don't even know how he had my I think we must have spoken briefly once. And he rang me, I'm not joking, 7 times in one day when we were at Labour conference to tell me that the Tories were about to announce a general election. And I was like, please, can you stop phoning me? I'm really sorry. But
do you remember conference 2019 when basically like everyone decamped from, I think it was Brighton, back to Westminster because, well, it was a chain of events, wasn't it, that then precipitated the election. I can't remember what the specific short-term trigger was. Possibly prorogation? I can't remember.
Yeah, what was that catalyst? That was...
But I remember everyone like leaving. And I think Corbyn didn't even give a speech, I don't think. I think his speech was cancelled.
Yeah, what was that? We're not going to be able to find that, am I?
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to find that through a quick little Google.
Anything else you want to discuss on the episode before we draw a line under this?
No, let's go into... Yeah.
Happy days.
Yeah.
Ava Santini, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Ollie.